911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Dia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Sasquatch Odyssey. Thank you guys, as always, for joining us for the show. We've got a great guest lined up, but I want to start by inviting you. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. You get me at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. Check out the premium content section. You can become a member, get additional content each week, and help support the show. As I said, we've got a great guest. If you've been around the Bigfoot world for more than 10 minutes, you know who this lady is. It's none other than Kathy Strain. She's had some amazing encounters she's going to share with us tonight. She's a forest archaeologist, she's a tribal relations program manager, and she's got 2 degrees in anthropology. We're going to get into the First Nations and the Native American perspective on Bigfoot tonight, among many other topics we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about evidence, DNA, the whole 9 yards. So, Kathy's on the line. She's raring to go. I'm going to stop yammering so we can get over and get the show started with her. You guys sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I want to welcome Kathy to the show. Thanks for coming on the show tonight, Kathy.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. The pleasure's all mine. So I know a lot of people have probably heard you do interviews in the past and heard you talk about the work that you do. But for those that don't know Kathy Strain, would you just sort of go into a little bit about yourself, your background, and what it is that you do?
Oh, sure. In real life, I am the forest archaeologist and tribal relations program manager for the N.A.W.A.C National Forest in California. And I have a bachelor's and master's degree in anthropology. And so on a regular basis, I study prehistoric and historic sites, and I protect them. And, I interact with tribes and make sure their concerns or desires to still gather traditional plants are met, and lots of fun stuff.
Let's just dive right into the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot thing. What got you interested in this subject? I know there had to be that one thing that sort of captured your imagination, or that one thing that happened to you that got you very interested in the subject and sort of led you on this path that you've been on for quite a few years now. So just tell the audience and myself, what got you interested in the subject?
Well, strangely enough, when I was a little girl, I watched Legend of Boggy Creek. and I was just blown away by it. And so then I roughly fifth grade or so, I asked my teacher, what do I need to do in order to study Bigfoot for a living? And she said, well, you're probably going to have to be an anthropologist. And so in a lot of ways, if it wasn't for the Bigfoot phenomena, I would not be what I am today. It steered me on this path of, and I figured it out. Nobody else believed in Bigfoot but me, and I was going to do it for a living. But I found anthropology to be so interesting that I continued on that path. And so, I graduated, I'm just going to give away my age, in 1990 with my bachelor's. And so if you think about how many years had gone by just getting to that stage, and then it took me until 2012 to even have a sighting. And so all that time, I was still deeply involved with Bigfoot groups, doing Bigfoot studies all that time without ever having actually seen Bigfoot.
I definitely want to get into your personal encounters and your sightings, but just tell us a little bit about what you do with the Native American people, and let's sort of get into the Native American culture and what you've discovered through your work there and how they approach the Sasquatch subject and what some of the history has shown us in the Native American community about these creatures.
Sure. So I was very fortunate to have been raised in a town called Porterville, California. And the Thule Indian Reservation is located near Porterville. And I went to school with several members of that tribe. And probably when I was in high school, I guess, I was able to visit the reservation, and I saw the hairy man pictographs there. And at that time, I didn't have any in-depth knowledge or anything like that told me what it was, but I knew that it was super cool and people talked about it and that kind of thing. And so I was aware that at least our local tribe had a strong belief in Bigfoot. But it wasn't until after I got my first permanent job with the U.S. Forest Service there in Porterville. Well, it was basically located on the Hot Springs Ranger District. We were going to do an excavation, and so I had to talk with the elders of the tribe to work with them of what was going to happen if we found human remains and all that stuff that went with it. And we got to talking about Bigfoot, and they were just fascinated with the fact that I believed in Bigfoot and that I thought he was flesh and blood. And so they started telling me about their traditional beliefs of what they believe, like such as, at least for the Tule River, they don't believe you're ever going to find a grinding, what we call bedrock mortars, within a giant sequoia grove, because they believe giant sequoia groves belong to Bigfoot. And so a woman wouldn't spend time milling, making acorn mill or flour if the Bigfoot was just going to take it from her because he actually liked Indian food and those kinds of things. So they started telling me all this stuff, and I would write it down. And I remembered later when I started doing additional studies, when I then, years passed, I had all those stories. I ended up going to another job for the Forest Service, but in another state. Then I came back to California, and the tribe now that is around me now are the N.A.W.A.C. And I started talking to them about Bigfoot, and it was kind of like, I don't know why I didn't think of it before, but it's simply, I just always thought that Bigfoot was a Northern California belief, and that the Tule Indians, that was some kind of anomaly, that they were unique in their situation. But pretty much I always kind of figured only tribes in certain areas believe that. And then I quickly figured out that almost all tribes have some form of a Bigfoot story, one way or the other. Sometimes it's brief, sometimes it's very detailed. Sometimes Bigfoot is a hero, sometimes he's a creator. Most of the time, he's someone you want to stay away from. So there's all kinds of different, behaviors that they attribute to him. But essentially, he's just like a coyote, just like any other animal that is in the natural environment. That's exactly what they believe Bigfoot to be. Just, he walks on two legs, but he belongs there. He's part of the natural environment, part of the forest. and that's what they believe.
Yeah, I've talked to several people up in British Columbia, and I've talked to some First Nations people, and that seems to be across the board with these things. They talk about how it's viewed in their culture and how they've talked to the elders in their community, and they just talk about Bigfoot, saying you would see Bigfoot just like you would a squirrel, or just like you would a bear, or just like you would a rabbit in nature. And it's just one of those things that those people have always understood to be part of the natural world. And it's very interesting to me that we've sort of moved away from that in our 2021 evolved culture that we're currently in. I interact with and talk to so many different people, and there's so many divided camps out there as to what these things are or what they could be, and just this divisiveness in the community. Well, frankly, there is no community, in my opinion. It doesn't appear that way. I know that's probably a broad generalization, but I'm sure there's niche communities out there where people are very like-minded, and they go out and search for these things, and they believe very similar things. But across the board with the Native American people that I've talked to, that's not the case. It's just sort of one of those things that people know, and they deal with it. Now, in your book, Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters, some of those stories obviously are from the Native American culture and the Native American people. And I often talk to people that I've had interviews with and have seen these things. Some have, some haven't. And I always remind people that I believe these things are flesh and blood. I believe they're a flesh and blood animal. That's my personal opinion. And I believe that these things have probably hurt and or killed people. And is that what you've come to understand from dealing with the Native American people? Are most of the stories not that great? What's your opinion on that? Or what have you heard from the Native American people?
I think there's a lot of diversity in the Native people. You know, the most prevalent belief system is that he does indeed hurt people, that he can steal children or females, either to eat or to keep captured. You know, you can kind of figure out what that means. But it just depends. Like the Tule River don't have any of those beliefs. They believe that he is a creator and a good person and a part of who they were. And when one of their people passed away, his name is Harry Man. He is responsible to come and get that soul and take them over to the other side. And so I can't think of anything more important to a tribe than who is it that's supposed to come get you and make sure you get, to heaven, essentially. And so that's a very powerful placement for any animal to be in that position versus, the tribe right next door to it have a complete different belief that, you just leave them alone. And if they have stake claim to this berry patch, you don't get any berries from that. That's theirs. Leave them alone. Don't make them mad. Don't look them in the eye. If they come into the area, you leave the area for safety purposes. And so, and I think that's what I find the most intriguing about these stories, because if this was a made up, and you got to remember that Native Americans didn't have the internet, didn't have the phone 100 years ago. And so, if they have a story that matches something that's all the way across the entire United States, it's because they observed that same behavior. They observed these tall, hairy things. They didn't have the ability to say, hey, Miss Pierce, what do you think? Or do you have this made up 8-foot tall hair covered thing? Because if you don't, let's tell you about it so you can put it in your culture. I always hear critics always say, well, Native Americans don't believe in that stuff. That's white people stuff. And I said, really? Because you should ask them. That's their culture. It's up to them to tell you what they believe, not for you to tell them what they don't believe. And so it's just kind of frustrating. But the diversity of an animal, to me, is what gives it credence, because a made up animal should be pretty static across the board. And Bigfoot stories are not like that at all.
That is a fascinating point and a very good point that you make. And it's like that across history. It's like you said, they couldn't pick up the phone and dial this other tribe across the country and say, hey, do you guys have this in your history? If not, let's insert it so we'll be on the same page. And I hear critics talking about those things, While we're on the subject of critics, let's get your opinion on a couple of things. This is the question I always get from critics. I get in these groups on Facebook and I interact with people and I'm talking to folks, and there's always that one or two folks in the group. I don't really understand why they're in a Bigfoot group other than to just cause trouble, I guess, for lack of a better term. But there's always these questions, why hasn't a body been found? Because I personally believe that I've read enough historical accounts throughout history. I think these things have been shot. I think they've been killed. But again, if you shot one of these things in, say, 1802, what do? You bury it and you move on, right?
1800s, I would have just left it there and ran away. I don't know that anybody would take the time to dig a hole that big.
And that's a very, very valid point, right? But we're clearly on the same page in our thinking. You're not thinking about that. Something attacks you or something attacks your camp or something steals something from your camp. You shoot it, you move on, and you go back to mining or doing something in the field, whatever it is you were doing before that happened, right? It's not the same thing as it is today. In your opinion, why do you think there hasn't been a body produced at this point? It's 2021 and these things are seen on almost every continent. Why do you think we don't have that definitive proof that everybody seems to be searching for?
Well, I'm, like I said, an archaeologist. I've been a field-going archaeologist for more than 32 years. And so that means I started when I was 10, and that doesn't count. That's just with the Forest Service. Doesn't count years before when I was doing other things like contract work. And in all my years, and so the U.S. Forest Service, if you know, that is your local, like your national park, it's your national forest, it's treed. We do have grasslands, that kind of thing. And in all my years, I have only ever seen one dead bear. Only one, and it was nowhere near a road. It obviously died of natural causes or something to that effect. I mean, it was one of the longest hikes I've ever been in my life. I thought I was going to die. Roughly 5 or so miles then from a road. I couldn't tell you now if there's more roads in there now, but I was shocked. In fact, I was like, "That's a dead bear in the middle of nowhere," kind of thing. And I went over and I looked at it, and it was already so decomposed and starting to melt away kind of thing that I figured it had only been dead a couple of days. Well, all the other animals in the forest were taking their turn, getting a piece of it, eating it, taking it away, spreading it out. And so nature has a habit. I mean, if nature didn't help us dissolve dead things, you'd be walking on bones, right? That's not how nature works. Nature breaks down those things, puts that nutrition back into the ground, and then new things come out of it. And every animal out in the forest, be it ants, be it larger animals, all get their piece, and so it helps break it down. And so unless you personally shot that animal, saw where it dropped, and you immediately go after that, and in order to collect a piece of it for evidence, which I hope people would do, of course, not just shoot a Bigfoot and run away and leave it there now, today. Nature's going to take its course. Either the other Bigfoot family members are going to come get it and take care of it of however they're going to take care of it, or, the rest of nature is going to take its piece and it's going to eventually return to the soil. So if for some reason you weren't able to take care of it that second and you went to go get something, back in those days, you didn't have GPS or GIS in order to map where you're at and come back to the exact same spot. So, it's why is it that we only have one really good film of Bigfoot, the Patterson-Gimlin film? Why is that? Everybody nowadays has cameras. Today I got a new phone myself, and I can actually take a decent picture. But the phone that I had previously, I couldn't even take a good picture of my new granddaughter. It was just like she's a secret Bigfoot because she's always fuzzy, So I think too, a lot of the problems is you may have a camera in your hand, you may have a gun in your hand, but I think you're overwhelmed. I'm somebody who believes in Bigfoot, but yet when I had my first experience of seeing a Bigfoot, I didn't take a picture. I had a phone, a camera on me because it's overwhelming. And your brain takes a few seconds to go, what am I looking at? Because human nature is we do not like things that are new and we're not familiar with. And so whenever we see something that we don't understand, we try at first to categorize it as something that we know. So a lot of times people go, oh, I'm looking at a bear because what else is hairy and, walks in the forest? But then your mind starts to readjust like, wait a minute, I don't think that's a bear. And so by the time then you react, that maybe you pull out your gun or your camera or whatever it is that you have, the incident is now completed, because most sightings don't last more than 10 seconds or whatever it is, maybe 6 seconds. And so it's that reaction time. So does that mean we don't have any evidence that Bigfoot exists? No, of course we do. We have footprints, we have hair, we have all kinds of things. Witnesses by themselves are evidence. It's not proof. Proof is a scientific level of, where other people can replicate that data. You have a body, every scientist in the world can come examine it, all come to the conclusion of what it is. But we definitely have evidence that Bigfoot exists.
I agree. And I want to talk a little bit about the Patterson-Gimlin film. That was one of the things that I talked to Dr. Meldrum when I had him on the show recently. I asked him about that because that's sort of the pinnacle of Bigfoot evidence, right? It's some of the most compelling film. That film has been analyzed second only to the JFK assassination. And nobody has been able to say with any definitive proof that, hey, that's a person in a suit, right? That's Bob Hieronymus in a suit. No, it stood the test of time. And that's one of the things I asked Dr. Meldrum. Do you believe that is, in fact, a Sasquatch? And if so, why? And he said just based on the footprint evidence alone that was connected to that film and collected after that film was taken, not even having the film, he would have been confident in saying that was made by a living, breathing creature. And then you throw in the film itself and the kinetics of movement and those kind of things. So I assume, based on what you said, that you believe the same thing, that is, in fact, a real Sasquatch, and that is evidence to prove their existence.
Yes, I absolutely 100% believe that is a real film. And, it's based on, I always kind of like those backseat people go, well, how would you know it would move? Well, I'm not dumb. I've seen plenty of living animals in my lifetime and how they move. They move like an animal. They move like they belong in that environment. It's not somebody wearing the absolutely ridiculous Hieronymus statement of, that he took his glass eye and stuck it in the mask so it was gleaming, and it's just ridiculous. He would, if that was a person in a suit, they would not glide like an animal that is comfortable walking in that environment. If that Patty was just gliding like she'd been there 1,000 times and didn't have any problem with her feet or her body or anything like that, being in a bulky hot suit, and so yes, I completely 100% believe that is a real film.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think I've said it on other interviews, and I think I said it to Dr. Meldrum. I believe that the Patterson-Gimlin film did some huge things for Sasquatch, right? It sort of put it on the map. It brought it to the forefront of other people saying, whoa, this thing could be real. I believe that's real. But it also did the opposite, in my opinion. And anything that you gather after that 60 seconds of film, if it's not to that caliber, then people just look at it and say, that's fake. That's a blob squatch, right? And then you have... And I don't like usually getting into individuals, but I'll just throw it out there. Todd Standing, who has video after video after video that's just HD quality. And those videos are one of two things. They're some of the most compelling evidence ever captured on film, or they're fake. It's just that simple. And I think that I have my opinions on that. We don't necessarily have to get into that now. I don't want to put you on the spot. I'll just say, I think, in my opinion, I think those videos are probably fake. But I don't have any proof. I can't prove that definitively. So I still have to leave room, this gray area of saying, okay, that could be real. Otherwise, I become those people, right? If it's not the Patterson-Gimlin film, then everybody says it's fake. Same thing with people hoaxing footprints and casts and things like that. I am certainly not a physical anthropologist. I can't look at a cast and definitively say XYZ makes this a true and real cast footprint made by a living creature. But there are people out there who do that. And some of the evidence that's out there, I believe, is hoaxed. I've seen videos that I think are hoaxed. People send me pictures all the time, that sort of go into sightings that they want to come on the show and talk about. And I look at it and it's clearly a bad CGI image, right? It's computer generated. It's not real. And that's unfortunate because there are so many thousands of people every year that see these things. And some of them have very traumatic experiences. That's one of the reasons I started this show, was to give people a space to come on and talk about their encounters. A lot of people are going through PTSD. You had which we're going to get to. We're going to get to your sightings, obviously. I definitely want to talk about your encounters. But some of those things, even if they're sort of benign, you're seeing something that's not supposed to exist. Therefore, there's some psychological things that happen. But I'm going to stop rambling and ask you a question. What do you think about the evidence that's out there now? Is there anything that stands out in your mind as far as DNA evidence, or things that you've heard of during your research, or things that you've seen in your research that are not maybe as definitive as the Patterson-Gimlin film, but would play a close second in proving these things actually exist?
I have seen videos, some that are public but mostly private ones, that I think do show something, probably a Bigfoot. I wish it was a little more, had more time, not just as brief as some of these are. And of course, better quality would be helpful. But most of the stuff that I've seen out there have just been outright frauds, either CG'd or, badly faked, where it's so badly faked, it's like, did you mean for us to take this seriously? Or were you trying to, you were really trying to be funny and nobody took it as being funny, kind of thing, So it's pretty hard. A lot of people, because of all that when somebody comes out and says, well, I had this experience, here's what I saw, and maybe shows a picture of it, and they, of course, have to draw circles to go, maybe this isn't the greatest quality, but, it was standing right there, I blah, blah, blah. And so they see them being attacked and that they're being made fun of, they're being scolded or whatever. And so the people who have the really good stuff that are completely believable, they have a impeccable background, that type of thing, they don't want to put it out there because they don't want to be treated that way. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with something that is so obviously bad that you say, dude, this is not real. It's not real. We don't appreciate being lied to. Go along your merry way. I think that's a legitimate thing to say to somebody. But I also think that somebody who is just looking for help and just, what do you guys think? Is this even possible? Do you see anything here? They should be treated like how they're asking. They need help. They are asking questions. Answer the questions. Don't mock them and sit there and berate them for asking a question. Yeah, okay, maybe the picture doesn't show what it is that they hoped it did, but then do it in an educating way. Like, this is what I see here. Maybe if you had done this, we would have a better view of it. Maybe run at it next time so you can get a really good video of it. Always have your tape recorder out so that you can capture these kinds of sounds, those kinds of things. I think we could be a community if we spent more time trying to lift each other up and educate each other in a scientific way than always trying to browbeat people so that it makes you the head of the pack or something to that effect. I don't know why those people do that kind of stuff. And I'm always trying to figure out, why do people who don't believe in Bigfoot want to talk about Bigfoot? I don't believe in fairies. I'm not going out on some fairy forum and saying, well, you guys are stupid. There's no such thing as these cute little pixies with wings. What do I care what they believe? Does that harm me that they believe in fairies? What does the belief in Bigfoot how does that harm any skeptic in this world? You're not getting money now, or I just don't get it. I don't know if they just have all the time in the world, and so this is what they choose to spend time on. I wish I had all the time in the world, but I barely have time to do much else besides my day-to-day job. So, yeah, those are the ones that usually are the most vicious and go for people's throats, are those skeptics that they say they're open-minded, but when in reality they're the most closed-minded people on earth. So
I agree, and I see it all the time. And I, in this position, doing this show, I have people reach out to me, like you said, that want help. I'm here in North Carolina, and there's a lady who reached out to me probably 3 weeks ago, and she sent me just a series of email after email after email after email, and it was all these pictures, and it was some video of her out around her property, and she said, here, I think this is a female. I think this is a juvenile. I think this is a female with a baby. Here's the alpha male that I believe is on the property vocalizing. And I was like, wow. So I started opening up all these emails, and I'm thinking I'm going to see all these pictures of these animals that she's describing. And there was nothing. It was just sticks and blurry trees, and the one video was her walking through her property, and she's calling this thing like she's calling in a domesticated dog. Attached to all these emails was the fact that she's terrified that these things are on our property, and she's trying to figure out how to get rid of them, but she's also feeding them. And she's calling them like it's a domesticated dog. So it was very conflicting information, and I felt really bad for her because she either was truly experiencing these things, and I tried to help her as best I could. I don't think I was as great at it as it sounded like you might have been had she sent you the emails, because clearly you have more experience in this than I do. But I tried my best to talk her through it. And I just, the second that I said I couldn't see anything in the picture, she got very upset with me. And at the end of the day, I told her, I said, through a phone conversation, I said, I don't disbelieve that you're having experiences on your property, and I want to help you as best I can. But we've got to have honest conversation to do that. And I think on both sides of the aisle, that seems to be a very hard row to hoe for some reason for some people, is to have this type of open discussion where everybody's got an open mind. I'm pretty skeptical. I was in law enforcement for 16 years. And as a cop, I'm just naturally skeptical. I'm sort of that person, right? If the evidence doesn't lead me in a certain direction, I just can't say, because I believe this, it is so. I have to have evidence to back that up. And I've said it numerous times. People always make fun of me for saying it, but I say, if Sasquatch were on trial by a jury of 12 peers, Sasquatch would be in jail because the evidence is overwhelming that it exists, right? But you have people that have good evidence. I've talked to people here in North Carolina that, very much like you said earlier, refuse to come forward with some of the most amazing photos and video that I've ever seen, that they've sent me in confidence, that they don't want me to share because they don't want the ridicule factor. They don't want people calling them a hoaxer. They don't want people saying that they're faking evidence. And I kind of see their point. And some of that stuff will probably never come to light. Some of the best evidence that these things exist have been caught on trail cams. We'll never see it because these people, like you said, don't want to be called hoaxers. Let's get into your sightings, if you wouldn't mind. I think you said your first actual encounter with these things was your visual encounter the first one, or had you had other experiences before you actually saw one for the first time?
Oh, yeah. I've seen many footprints. I've been screamed at many times. So, yeah, I had many experiences before, but never, had a visual sighting before. And so my first one was in 2012. We are members of the North American Wooded Conservancy, but prior to our joining the group, we had been invited down to a location called Area X that they had been doing a long-term trail cam project on site, doing just that, trying to get a photo of one on a trail cam. And so they invited us down to kind of check it out and see what was going on. And essentially the first day was just boring and hot and miserable. And I thought, oh boy, what did we sign up for? That was my husband and I. And the second day, basically my whole life changed after that. I mean, it was just amazing. But essentially, just a short story of it is that they had been throwing rocks on there was 4 cabins and they had these tin roofs. And they were throwing rocks on one, and everybody would run over to where the rock was to see what they could, any evidence, whatever. And then the next thing you know, rock would be thrown on another cabin roof, and we'd run over there. And it kind of got a little bit boring not boring, but, I didn't really want to run around and, just, it was May, and it was a little warm. Us from California, we're not really all that used to that kind of humidity, and so I was like, I'm going to stay at our base camp and I'm going to sit here. And eventually they all came back and we were sitting around a fire pit. There was no fire going because it's still daylight and it was plenty warm. And there was 5 of us there, and one of the members go, hey, I hear what sounds like footfalls. And we were like listening and I could hear it. And one thing about this is in Oklahoma, and so in Oklahoma, everything there pretty much is trying to kill you. I mean, there's snakes everywhere. There's this stuff called greenbrier it's like a nasty vine that's got little stabby thingies on it. And this property was really overgrown, and so you could only move comfortably in certain areas. Plus, there's big rocks. It's limestone. There was some fallen trees, and so we had a couple of paths, and one of this path we called a bottleneck because it was probably an old road that the landowner maybe had used to drive in a big circle through all these cabins, but this is the only one that was truly still relatively open, kind of thing. The easiest way to walk, around the property. And how I'm sitting, we're all in our lawn chairs, and I'm faced looking right down the bottleneck, and my husband Bob's next to me, and then next to him was Brian Brown. Mark McClurkin was looking basically, so that would have been to the east, and he was looking south. And then we had another member named Ken who was sitting on the other side of all the rest of us. In a lot of ways, he should have had the best view, but he wasn't, looking in the right direction. So the next thing I know, there's 2 of them coming along the edge. The bottleneck touches what we call the mountainside, and so the mountain basically stops at that location. So it's pretty flat, and then all of a sudden it gets real steep. But they're walking along the edge of that, and there's a big one and a little one. And it looks like that the big one is trying to make the little one come with it, just the little one's continuing to come basically towards us, but the big one's trying to stop it to kind of, no, we're going to do this instead, but couldn't get the little one under control. And so I saw him. It took me, I knew what I was seeing at that time. I didn't think bears or anything like that, but I was just like, oh my God, they're right there. So I jump up and I say, there they are. And I started running at them. And of course, some crazy lady running at you is going to cause you to react, of course. And so they turned all by themselves, turned and bolted up that hillside like nothing I have ever seen in my entire life. They were like on a bungee, where they just went boop, and they were all the way out of sight within like not even a second. It was like maybe half a second. Oh, yeah, something like that. I didn't count it because I'm in them running at them and trying to get as much details as I can. I knew I wasn't going to be able to see as much details of the little one, but I kept my eyes on the big one and really looked at its form. How was it built? As much as I could before it was gone. And so, at first I was so overwhelmed. I was just like, A, I just saw a Bigfoot, and 2, the intention of us being there was to potentially that we were looking for a body, getting a specimen, that kind of thing. And I just felt like there's just no way we're going to accomplish that. These things are, I used to personally, when someone would tell me, yeah, I was driving along and the Bigfoot was chasing my car and almost caught me. And I'm going, there's nothing that is that fast that would be wanting to get your car, kind of thing. Oh, yeah, I believe it now. I believe that they are capable of a lot. They're very powerful. They're very strong, and they're very fast because that's what they have to be in order to have survived. I mean, I've actually had hunters tell me that they've seen a Bigfoot run a deer down and kill it. And so I was just like, before I would go, yeah. And now I'm thinking maybe that's something that's possible because when they need to, I don't know that they could run that fast for a great distance, but certainly in bursts, they can pull that off.
Yeah, I've heard people over and over and over again that I've interviewed that have seen these things talk about the massive size. Obviously, that's one of those things that people just over and over, they say you can't put it into words. You can say something was 8 feet tall and it weighed X amount of pounds and it was this wide, but without actually having seen it yourself, there's really no way to fathom the size of these things. And then that's always the second thing that I usually hear is how fast they are and how unnatural in times the movement seems. It's like you said, it's like on a bungee or they're gliding, very much like Patty walking across the sandbar. Looked like she was gliding and she just was out for a stroll. And it's very, very natural to them, but it appears at times for us because we're trying to check that box and put what animal is this. It just doesn't compute and doesn't make sense for us, the way these things move.
Well, and it makes sense in the sense that everything adapts. You know, we're an animal. We've adapted to our environment. Things on islands adapt to the size of that island. They have had, we don't know how long they've been here, but they've had time to adapt. And if you're in a mountainous terrain, and you got to look for food and you've got to hunt or get meat by using what you have, you are going to now become very, very powerful. You're going to be fast so that you can catch what you need to catch. And you're going to walk across landscapes that would kill a human because we're okay, but we're not as sure-footed as a wild animal would be. And so you can see that great space that I know they were stepping on uneven boulders going up a very steep hill on briar, there probably was a rattlesnake in there. I mean, but it didn't mean anything to them because it was effortless for them. They'd done it 1 billion times by that time, that they went up and down hills. How as an anthropologist or an archaeologist, when I survey, I do it on a contour. And so I don't go straight up a mountain and straight back down, straight up a mountain, straight back down. How I do my surveys is I work the contour so that it's less harsh on my legs and my knees and on my, being out of breath and everything else. And so that's how humans generally do it. We work our way up something. We don't go straight up and straight down because we're just, unless you're, better shape than a lot of people, I guess, you could do that. But that's not normally how we conduct stuff. And going up and down, that was nothing to them. It was just like, so there's a mountain. Oh, well.
So what other encounters have you had with these things?
I've had lots of events, rock throws. One rock tried to kill my husband, Bob, once. I've had a rock thrown at me directly, and I barely moved in order to not hit me square in the chest. And I haven't seen as many footprints in a few years, for sure. I continue to be yelled at. It's something about me they don't like, apparently. But the next year, we were so overwhelmed by having this experience that we decided that in 2013 that each of us, my husband and I, would go for 3 weeks each apart from each other. And so my husband would go for 3 weeks, come back, and then I would go for 3 weeks because, we didn't want to let our kids, be unsupervised, of course. That would have been horrible. But the 3 weeks that I went, then I got to see what I call the baby Bigfoot. And talk about I'm there looking for Bigfoot, and yet I'm sitting on the back porch, and I'm higher than everybody else, and I'm looking at the trees because that's right. All archaeologists do the same thing. We can be talking to you, but we're looking at the ground, so we're looking for artifacts or whatever, or we're focused up looking for things up above us. And so I can have an entire conversation, but the entire time I'm looking around and taking in scenes. and I see this branch start to move, and it's wiggling kind of thing. And I thought, oh my God, that's one of those, more of those squirrels that's everywhere around here. And it keeps getting, but it's obviously heavier than a squirrel because it's really, bobbing. And next thing I see is this kind of a dog size, not huge by any stretch of the imagination, flat back, no tail, chimp. And I'm like, oh, well, look at that. There's that chimp. And it goes, over to the end of the thing and then jumps over to the next tree. And I'm like, oh. And then I go, Kathy, what are you, the stupidest human being on earth? There's no chimps in Oklahoma, and then I go, and I go, and we ran and we chased it. And it was gone. All you could see was the other trees that it had jumped to and all the branches wiggling. And so, but then later that next week, another member saw the same one again. So, and he said, even though I had just said I had saw this baby Bigfoot, at first he thought it was a chimp too. It was just as natural because it looked just like when you go to the zoo, And so it was just like, oh yeah, there you go. And then the next year, then I saw what you call the big ones, at least 8 foot, if not taller, old. He was gray, completely gray covered. And I had saw him through an opening, and I stayed put where I was, and I had everybody ran over there. And then I put my husband, Bob, who's 6 foot tall, in the space. Yeah, he had nothing on that Bigfoot. He was just like a little butterfly to the size of that thing.
Yeah, it always fascinates me that people describe how massive these things are, especially when you do like a size comparison like that. There's nothing that compares to them in the wild. Let me ask you this, Kathy. What do you think it's going to take to prove that these things exist? Do you think it's going to take a body? Is it going to be done by DNA? I reached out to Dr. Ketchum recently to try to get her on the show, and I know she's about to come out with some new information on her latest DNA study. I don't know what that is. She said she was going to be announcing some things. And I know that DNA has been collected, and there's always this sort of enigma, or I don't even know what the word is, around the DNA evidence. It's not conclusive. And one of the many things I asked Dr. Meldrum when I had him on, do you think DNA is enough? And his answer was very scientific. I don't know that there's any precedent of proving a novel species based on just DNA alone, because you don't have anything to compare it to, right? So what do you think personally it's going to take? Do you think somebody's going to have to shoot one of these things and drag it in and say, here you go? Or do you think video or something's going to be good enough? What do you think it's going to take to prove the existence beyond a shadow of a doubt?
I think it's going to take a body for sure. There just isn't. Meldrum is absolutely correct that we know of no cases where DNA by itself could define a species new to all of our history. And so it's going to take a body that multiple scientists from all kinds of different disciplines can study and make some determinations of where he belongs on the tree. Is he related to us? Is he related to chimpanzees? Who's his closest relative? Or is he completely new and something we've never even suspected, or whatever it is? But it's going to have to take a body so that they can study its foot structure. Can it talk? Does it have hands that can allow it to make tools? All those types of things, because you can't get that out of DNA for sure. And so, and that's part of the problems I think we have with DNA, is that we don't have the right primers. We don't have the right something that can easily pull out that this is a new species that needs to be categorized on its own, and of course, therefore protected. So that's the only solution that I can see, and I'm hoping there's multiple groups throughout the United States where that is their goal, and to give it to science. They're not trying to make money off of the discovery. They're trying to prove it scientifically. And so hopefully soon, and soon in geologic times could still be 100 years away. I mean, we don't know. I mean, one way or the other, we're either going to prove that it's real, or he's going to have problems continuing because of the rate that we're basically coming into his environment. It's going to put a lot of stress just like any other animal would have, is that once you don't have the territory and the food resources that you had at one point, you're going to have problems. You're going to become extinct, or you're going to have to start doing something else, or, hopefully not fighting back. That would be pretty terrible. But, it's something has to give in order for that species to survive. And so I would prefer, the one body. We don't need 10. One's just fine. Get it studied, get it classified of what it is, and hopefully get some protections in, and then go from there. And hopefully the government would give a nice, beautiful grant to somebody to be a Jane Goodall in the field and get us the stuff you can't get from either a dead body or DNA, which is, do they live in groups? Do they throw their males out when they turn a certain age and they have to go find their own way after that? Do they eat meat? Do they eat only vegetarian? Do they have to have this special resource? That's the next step. We don't have to worry about that right this minute, but that's something we can do in the future. But it's one of those things that go hand in hand with the discovery of a new species.
That was one of the questions that I asked Dr. Meldrum, was about the number of actual Sasquatch. We're just taking North America, right? The lower 48. How many of these things do you think they're actually there? Because if you look at the number of sightings across the country, the numbers are astronomical, right? These things are seen in basically every state in the lower 48 multiple times a year. And those are just the documented sightings. There's plenty of people, I'm sure, that see these things that don't actually report what they see. So my question was, what do you think the actual population is? And he estimated, based on a lot of scientific things that I didn't really comprehend, but in order to break it down for me, it was like, if a black bear can exist there, then a Sasquatch can probably exist. And we talked about specifically like the Pacific Northwest, certain states like Idaho, places like that, there may be 3,500 to 5,000, of these things. Not the numbers that some people think they need to survive, right? So that begs a whole litany of questions for me. Well, if they're not as prolific as some of us thought they might be, then how are these people seeing so many of them, right? So that leads you to believe, well, are people telling a lie? Blah, blah. You just go down the rabbit hole. But what do you think about the population? I mean, do you think there's got to be 150,000 of these things across the lower 48 for them to actually survive and have a viable breeding population? I mean, do you have any opinion on that? What do you think the population may be?
Well, to just put it in perspective, so in Area X, the first week Bob and I were there in 2012, we saw 3. So the 2 that were running at us, and then later Bob saw another one that was a completely different color. So these were dark brown, and he saw like a reddish Irish setter colored one. So that's just 3. The next year, I saw then what is a baby, right? Then the following year after that, he's very commonly seen. We call him Old Gray, who's obviously what we would call, I guess, something of the head of the household kind of thing, Big Daddy, because he's so large. That's just 5 individuals that are distinct in that little small area of what, the Ouachita Mountains. Do I think there's more? Oh, yeah, because we've seen other colors as well and other age groups that clearly, the bigger than, the baby smaller than, and a full-grown adult. And so just to throw it out there, say there's just maybe, let's be crazy. Let's say there's 15, because there's some adult males and there's got to be some breeding females, and everybody in that age group of grandpa and grandma through newborn. So if there's 15, and let's say that there are only 15 in that mountain range, well, there's other mountain ranges, in that general area. So, I mean, it can multiply pretty quickly. I don't think it's 150,000 for sure. But I don't think it's as low as maybe 5,000 either. I think it's somewhere in between of that. And I think it depends where it is. There may be some sightings in certain areas where that's just a pasture, that's a migration of some sort, versus like Northern California, Washington, and Oregon, potentially could have a large population because we have vast areas of wilderness. So I think it just depends. What that number is. I truly probably shouldn't even speculate on it because I'm not a biological anthropologist, but I think it's somewhere, it could be maybe in the 20,000, something like that. But I don't think it's outrageous. I think if there was 150,000, we'd be seeing a lot more of them more frequently.
I tend to agree with that. I think it's probably somewhere closer to the numbers you described. I think that. I know we're getting short on time. I know your time's valuable, so I want to get to the point of wrapping up. But I just have, out of curiosity, I know you haven't told me this. I assume you appear to be in that it's a flesh and blood creature camp. Is that a safe assumption?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I find it very fascinating that some of the people I talk to, Ron Moorhead, for example, who's been on the show, I love Ron. He has some pretty out there experiences that he shares. And some people in the community, I'm doing the air quotes in my studio now, the woo-woo part of the Sasquatch thing, right? I've talked to people that have seen lights in association with habituation sites, with these things not necessarily being a habituation site, but unwanted on their property constantly in sort of this isolated area near the N.A.W.A.C National Forest here in North Carolina, for example. And almost without fail, everybody I talk to that has those types of encounters with these things, and it's not that one chance of, hey, I was walking to my deer stand and I've been hunting there for 25 years and then boom, I saw a Sasquatch run across the field. Over and over, when people are seeing these things close up and having multiple encounters with multiple individuals, they describe seeing orbs, they describe seeing lights, and there's more of this woo-woo type of experience. Have you come across that in your research? Have you talked to people that have had those types of encounters and those types of experiences? And there's obviously no right or wrong answer. I'm just asking you for your opinion. I know it's impossible to say if there's a correlation, but what do you make of that? And of course, let's not forget mind speak, right? I've talked to people that have claimed to have mind speak from Sasquatch. So what do you think about the more woo-woo type of encounters with these things?
Well, I have spoken to many people that have had, and very logical, well-educated people. And believe me, one time I was in the field with someone and we were Bigfooting and he was seeing these lights. And so I finally got let's go see this to see if we can replicate it and see if we can identify it. And we ended up going there. The lights appeared and I easily identified what it is that he was seeing. And so sometimes, like I said earlier, you as humans are incredibly intelligent people, but we like to know what we know. We don't like new things inherently. And so when we see something that we don't understand, we immediately put it into a category of something that we do understand. It's a light floating all by itself. An orb is something, that's just a magical thing and blah, blah, blah. When in reality, it's really very likely a real thing. You just don't know what it is. And it's probably widespread. This example, he was seeing these lights, they were lightning bugs. And, they were just all over the place, but he couldn't put that in his head because he had never seen a lightning bug before. So he didn't actually believe that they were real. So now he's seeing all these things and I finally, we get up real close to him and kind of, get it corralled and goes, it's a bug. And I said, yeah, that's correct. You were seeing lights, but it had an innocent explanation of why you were seeing those lights. And so I don't, unless I get a sense that somebody's a little bit off, kind of thing, I think what they are telling you the truth of what these weird things are that are happening, but they're attributing it to the wrong source. And therefore it gets this woo-woo attachment when in reality it's just a plain ordinary thing that some people would easily identify while somebody else has struggles with what it is. And so, so I'm not a believer in woo-woo because I am a scientist and there's normally always an explanation scientifically of what it is that you're seeing. And I don't attribute something paranormal to it, something not of this earth. And so and I try very hard when I talk to those people. Well, could it be this? Could it be this? Have you considered doing this? Try to get, a photo of it so we can, maybe send it to somebody who is a specialist in that type of thing, because I can't know everything. Nobody knows everything, but I can find somebody who possibly knows a little more about that, kind of thing. And so, that's my view. And it doesn't mean I won't talk to somebody if they want to talk about it. But if somebody's going to sit there and insist, oh no, it was definitely mind speak, or it was this, or this, and there's no way you're going to convince me it's not happening. Well, then we can't have a conversation, because if you're not open to accepting that maybe there is a scientific, logical explanation for your experience, then I can't help you. And so that's the best I can do with that. So, well,
I appreciate that answer.
Kind of thing.
that was the very scientific approach to that answer, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think if you're not in this type of field and you're not willing to approach everything with an open mind, you probably should go do something else. Because if you've already made up your mind one way or the other, then what are you doing? We've got to listen to each other. We've got to take the evidence at hand and sort of make our own judgments. At the end of the day, we got to believe what we believe. But people who close themselves off to the possibility of anything, it just does everybody a disservice, because at the end of the day, people are seeing something out there, and it's always fascinating to me that if you mention lights or you mention something that's a little bit more out there and you're talking about anything other than a 9-foot, 1,200-pound ape running around in the woods of North Carolina, people think you're crazy. Well, in and of itself, if you've never seen one of these creatures, a 9-foot, 1,200-pound ape running around in North Carolina is kind of crazy to other people. So,
yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it's, this one lady, I just tell this story briefly, was one of the nicest people I've ever talked to on the phone. And her daughter had, I believe it was the one who sent in her Bigfoot report, but she kept insisting that what she had seen was a circus bear that had been trained to walk upright, and ride those little unicycles with the little tutu on. That she was convinced that that's what that was, and nobody was going to talk her out of it. And I was like, so me saying you saw a Bigfoot, you're not going to accept? She goes, no, it was a bear riding, not riding, but it was one of those bears that they had just let go. And that's what she had seen. And so it's almost the opposite kind of thing. And so I don't try to force that on those people. I don't go, no, you saw a Bigfoot and you better accept it, versus, yelling at somebody who says, no, I saw lights and they were glittering around the Bigfoot. Okay, well, I'm not going to I will try to help you get to the conclusion. But if you insist that this is the way it is, then okay. I'm not put on this earth to argue with people. I'm put on this earth to help you find a better way of what you experience, not to argue, not to, make you believe in something you don't want to believe in, or force you to change your mind on something. I think that's a true scientist. That's their job. We're not here to break somebody down. That's not what we do. We want to educate and lift you up, not pull you down.
Well, that is the perfect way to end this. I think that sums you up in a nutshell, Kathy. You have been phenomenal, and I can't thank you enough for your time and coming on the show and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It was very delightful. I didn't even realize an hour had passed, but thank you very much. And if you ever want to have me back, feel free to ask.
Awesome. I thank you so much. And that's it for tonight's show, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you guys next week.